What if one of the darkest days in football history didn't have to happen? What if 39 people went to a football match and never came home because of a lie? For decades, the story has been simple: drunken English hooligans, a mindless charge, and a tragic accident. But that story is incomplete. It's a cover-up that protected the powerful, shifted blame onto the fans, and changed the face of football forever. New evidence, forgotten testimonies, and a 40-year fight for justice reveal a terrifying truth. The Heysel Stadium was a death trap waiting to happen, and those in charge knew it. This is not just a story about football violence. This is a story about organizational failure, institutional cowardice, and the unsolved mysteries that still haunt the beautiful game. Stick around, because what we uncovered in the original Belgian police reports changes everything you thought you knew about that night.
The first question is the most obvious. Why here? Why choose a 55-year-old crumbling relic, a stadium that one Arsenal fan called a dump, to host the biggest game in European football? Both Liverpool and Juventus begged UEFA to move the final. Liverpool CEO Peter Robinson and Juventus president Gianpiero Boniperti made urgent calls, warning that Heysel was not fit for purpose. But UEFA refused. Their stadium inspection, it lasted just 30 minutes. 30 minutes to greenlight a venue for 60,000 people. The stadium was so dilapidated that fans without tickets were literally kicking holes in the cinder block outer wall to get in. This wasn't just a poor choice, it was a criminal negligence. But the stadium's condition was only part of the recipe for disaster. The decision about where to put the fans would prove to be the fatal mistake.
Look at this layout. This is UEFA's plan. See this section? Zone Z. It was supposed to be neutral, a buffer zone of local Belgian fans between the passionate Juventus and Liverpool supporters. It was a good idea in theory, but in practice, it was a deadly deception. Tickets for Zone Z were sold locally in Belgium, but because of a huge Italian community in Brussels and corrupt ticket touting, thousands of these neutral tickets ended up in the hands of Juventus ultras. So instead of a neutral buffer, Zone Z became an extension of the Juventus end, placed right next to the most volatile section of Liverpool fans. Both clubs had warned UEFA this would happen. They were ignored. The divide between them? Just a flimsy chain-link fence and a few yards of no man's land. And how many police officers were stationed to guard this powder keg? 8. As the sun began to set in Brussels, the tension was palpable. And all it took was one spark to ignite the tragedy.
At approximately 7 p.m., an hour before kickoff, the first object was thrown: a bottle, then a can. Then, because the stadium was literally falling apart, fans picked up stones from the crumbling terraces beneath them and began to hurl them across the divide. Then flares were set off, and as one Liverpool fan who was there said, that seemed to spark a huge panic, a charge. A group of Liverpool hooligans surged forward. The flimsy fence gave way. The 8 police officers were utterly overwhelmed, and the charge began. Terrified for their lives, eyewitnesses report seeing knives and even pistols. Thousands of Juventus fans had nowhere to go. They couldn't go onto the pitch, police blocked them. They couldn't exit the gates, officials wouldn't open them. Their only escape was to flee backwards, towards a decaying retaining wall. The pressure became immense. Fathers were crushed against their sons. Then the sound that still haunts survivors, a low, sickening thud, like explosives at a distant quarry as the wall gave way. In the aftermath, as families searched for their loved ones, officials made another unthinkable decision, one that would add insult to fatal injury. Even as emergency workers tended to the dying and injured, a meeting was held. UEFA officials, Belgian police, and football associations decided the show must go on. Juventus players had explicitly requested the match be cancelled. They were ignored. The reason? They believed calling off the match would cause even more violence outside the stadium. So at 8:40 p.m., over an hour late, the players were forced to walk onto a pitch that felt like a graveyard. Liverpool captain Phil Neal later said, "In hindsight, it would have been a better decision to call off the game." Juventus won 1-0 with a Michel Platini penalty. The celebration was hollow, the trophy meaningless. Liverpool players only realized the full scale of the tragedy when their bus was surrounded by angry Juventus fans at their hotel. They had to be driven directly onto the airport tarmac to escape. They flew home in stunned silence, their reputation and their club forever tarnished. But before the dust had even settled, the blame game began. And the story that was about to be told to the world was a carefully constructed lie. Before any proper investigation, the narrative was set. This was solely the fault of English hooligans. The Sunday Times had already called football a slum sport watched by slum people. Heysel was their proof. 14 Liverpool fans were convicted of manslaughter and served time. And they were guilty. They triggered the disaster. But what about the others? The Belgian police captain in charge of security, Johan Mahieu, who had never supervised a football match before. He received a mere 6-month suspended sentence. The man whose walkie-talkies had no batteries, whose policing plan was non-existent, effectively walked free. UEFA president Jacques Georges was threatened with imprisonment, but also received a conditional discharge. The institutions protected themselves. The cover-up was successful, but the consequences of this lie would ripple through time, directly causing another tragedy just 4 years later. In 1989, just 4 years after Heysel, 97 Liverpool fans were crushed to death at Hillsborough. The initial police and media response? To blame drunken, ticketless hooligans. Why? Because of a psychological phenomenon called the availability heuristic. After Heysel, the entire mindset of British authorities was geared towards containing violence, not protecting safety. At Hillsborough, police saw a crowd surge and assumed it was another hooligan charge. They treated fans as criminals, not victims. They funneled people into a deadly crush and then refused to open gates, fearing a pitch invasion. The same culture of blame that was perfected after Heysel was immediately deployed after Hillsborough. The Sun newspaper's infamous "The Truth" headline had its roots in the Heysel cover-up. The lie told in Brussels made it easier to tell a lie in Sheffield. Heysel's legacy wasn't just a ban, it was a poisonous blueprint for blaming fans. But what did the ban actually do to English football? UEFA's ban was swift and brutal. All English clubs were exiled from Europe for 5 years, Liverpool for 6. Everton, arguably the best team in England at the time, was denied a chance at the European Cup. Their magnificent team broke up. The English game was pariah, skint, and stuck in the past. Crowds vanished. The game was toxic. But as historian Dr. John Williams notes, ironically, it was England that benefited most from Heysel in the long run. The ban forced a reckoning. The slum stadiums had to be rebuilt. The slum image had to be cleaned up. Turbocharged by the Taylor Report after Hillsborough, English football was completely rebuilt with all-seater, safe stadiums. This created the perfect sanitized product for television, and in 1992, the First Division clubs broke away to form the Premier League, a commercial entity designed to maximize TV money. That ban, born from tragedy, forced English football to modernize and ultimately created the global financial powerhouse we see today. The $6.7 billion TV deal, the most watched league in the world, it all traces its roots back to the ashes of Heysel. But while England learned its lesson, one country did not, and the failure to learn would create a lasting divide.
For Italy, the response was different. While England underwent a revolution, Italy largely chose to forget. As author Francesco Chiaramani noted, a strange amnesia descended over Juventus. The Italian state and football federation showed little interest in pursuing justice for their own citizens. Most damningly, Italy failed to learn Heisel's lessons about stadium safety. While England built all-seater marvels, Italian football continued to struggle with violence and crumbling infrastructure for decades. The lessons that could have saved lives in Italy were ignored. Families of the victims felt abandoned. Antonio Conti, who lost his daughter, said, "The Italian state, the Italian Football Federation, and Juventus took little interest in the case. For years, the memorials were inadequate, the apologies slow in coming. The truth was buried for decades. But now, new memorials are forcing a reconciliation, and the symbolic meaning behind them will break your heart."
For 20 years, there was silence between the clubs. Then, in 2005, they were drawn together in the Champions League. It forced a reckoning. At Anfield, Liverpool fans held up cards spelling amicizia, friendship. But not all Juventus fans were ready to forgive. Some turned their backs. For the 40th anniversary, Liverpool unveiled a new memorial. It features two scarves, one Liverpool red, one Juventus black and white, knotted together. It symbolizes the unity and solidarity between the two clubs, a bond formed through shared grief and mutual respect. It's a powerful symbol, but for some families, it's not enough. The legal battles for full accountability continued for decades. It was only recently that courts finally recognized that UEFA itself shared blame for the disaster. So what are the unsolved mysteries? The questions that remain after 40 years? The answers point to a conspiracy far deeper than anyone has ever admitted.
After 40 years, Heysel is still filled with unanswered questions. Why did UEFA insist on Heysel despite the warnings? Was it just arrogance, or were there financial incentives with Belgian football authorities? How could the police walkie-talkies have been issued without batteries? Was it incompetence or deliberate sabotage? Why were the exit gates locked when fans tried to escape? Who gave that order? What happened to the full 30-minute inspection report? Why has it never been made public? The greatest mystery of all is why Heysel remains relatively overlooked. Liverpool's Anfield has a prominent Hillsborough memorial, but Heysel is commemorated by a small plaque. This disparity continues to hurt the families of Heysel victims. The 39 victims deserve more than memories. They deserve the full truth. Heysel wasn't just a tragedy, it was a preventable catastrophe. It was a systems failure, and until we fully acknowledge that, we risk forgetting the most important lesson of all. Those in power must always be held accountable for the safety of those who trust them.
Remember their names. Remember the 39, because the pursuit of truth is the highest form of respect. Subscribe for more mysteries of the beautiful game. And remember, some secrets are only secrets until someone decides to tell the truth.